Things are about to take a weird turn. It's time to bring you the strangest stories from inside the emergency room. It's time for Bizarre in the ER. And this first story is a cautionary tale on so many levels. A 64-year-old man was cooking while under the influence. CUI, don't do it. Searching for kitchen utensils, he stumbled, fell towards the kitchen counter, pierced his eye on a pan handle. Whoa! Yeah, now you know what I'm talking about. It took a team of surgeons working over several hours to remove it. And of course, this is not something you want to remove on your own. That
he had a bad day.
Quite a visual. You do not need to be working in a hospital to realize that is not where a panhandle is supposed to go. We're now joined by ophthalmologist Dr. Brian Boxer-Wackler to talk about this. This guy, clearly they were able to remove that object. You have to ask yourself what's going on with this guy's vision afterwards.
He is the luckiest guy, right? I mean, he must have a horseshoe up his butt to come out of this with no vision loss. Whoa. He did not lose any vision in the eye. He didn't lose the eye either. It just happened to miss the eye. It just happened to not spear the brain and lodge behind the throat. No vital structures there, fortunately. So there probably was an orbital floor fracture, which I'm sure they use mesh and some other materials to repair that. But he made a miraculous, amazing full recovery.
This woman scratched by a rusty nail while helping renovate a friend's house. And Dr. Batra, what happened?
So this one also is a really unfortunate one. It's called necrotizing fasciitis. And so necrotizing, as you might guess, means death or dying of the tissue, and the fascia refers to the sheath overlying your muscle. So this can be caused by a number of different types of bacteria. In this case, it was actually caused by black mold that was found in her bloodstream. Wow. But the idea is you just get this very aggressive infectious agent. Most common is actually something called group A strep, and it just seeds, and it can go incredibly quickly. You can develop fevers, you can be really quite sick and almost septic from this, but very challenging because the treatment for this is actually surgical, because you have to go in and take out
you have to
that
remove
dead
all
tissue.
that tissue. And why is it called fasciitis? Because it's an inflammation, infection of that fascia, that covering over muscle which forms tissue planes. It follows that tissue plane. That's why it can spread so quickly.
True emergency, because it spreads.
And gets seated in that fascia, like you said. To treat it, very often you have to do aggressive removal of the tissue.
It also highlights how the surface appearance of a wound can be misleading. That very first picture we showed you looked so gruesome on the surface, but this even more dangerous because of what's going on underneath. Yes, it didn't look right. You hopefully all would go see a doctor with that, but it just looked like a bit of a bruise with some surrounding redness, but underneath those deep layers where all the madness is occurring. So that's why you go to the ER right then and there and hope that you can keep your leg. We've all seen some pretty gruesome pictures online. You can't unsee them. Some leave us asking, what is it, what happened, and could it happen to me? So I want you all to look at these pictures. These are not for the faint of heart, clearly a gruesome injury. What you're seeing is the result of a rattlesnake bite. The weirdest part of this whole story, the snake was dead. So Milo's gentleman in Texas doing yard work. His wife, Jennifer, almost reached for a rattlesnake, wasn't sure what was going on, so he came in to defend her and apparently beheaded the rattlesnake. He went to dispose of the snake. The severed head latched onto his hand and gave him a massive dose of venom. Ended up with something known as DIC, disseminated intravascular coagulation, had internal bleeding, went into septic shock, kidney shut down, received 26 doses of antivenom. That's how much venom was injected into his hand. That is way more than a typical dose.
Typical is 2 to 4, and he got 26.
Most people don't realize that a rattlesnake, you could decapitate it, and yet it can still bite you. And think about it, the venom is still there. Mm-hmm. And it bites you, and it can't control how much. That is a potentially lethal dose. And there is some good news here, which it sounds like Milo is slowly recovering, still getting dialysis for kidney failure, needed skin grafts. But rattlesnakes, this is why I have a snake phobia, quite frankly, because I appreciate snakes, and I appreciate snakes and their habitat, but snakes, much like humans, we can spook one another.
Yeah.
And this is such a unique scenario because, again, it was decapitated. I remember learning when I went through my toxicology rotation that this could happen. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also one of the reasons that made me develop my phobia. If something can be decapitated and still bite me, that's freaky. The ER is a place where you can expect the unexpected. From sunup to sundown, we see some of the most unusual and bizarre cases. And here's another one. I want you to look at this picture. The man got into a brawl, walked away with a key stuck in and through his skull. And it doesn't take a doctor to realize that that key actually penetrated the skull and did work its way into or nearby the brain tissue. I didn't believe the story, because my thought was the skull is strong enough that it's going to deflect a key.
Right.
Because keys are somewhat dull. They're not that strong. I've tried to open a bottle with a key and the key bent. So I don't know how this actually got through the skull.
In this case, motorcycle key and the design of it was a little different. I think it was more long and sharp, almost like a screw, so that with enough force, it was sharp enough to penetrate the skull and into the brain.
Yeah, nonetheless, I wouldn't be comfortable with a key in my head. At any point in my life, I would not want this.
No, I don't think any. This was actually 2 inches into his scalp.
That's a long way.
Yeah, it took 3.5 hours of surgery to remove, and thankfully he was just fine, which is almost unheard of if you can imagine how intricately and how carefully.
It was those skilled Indian surgeons,
That's
right?
Yes.
Because this did happen in India, didn't it? So they had to perform what's called a craniotomy, so they removed a box of bone around that, isolated, and obviously very carefully unscrewed that key, because it's all about the collateral damage. Up next, we have your daily dose of gross, brought to you by Belly Buttons. Doesn't that sound yummy? Well.
Oh, that does not look yummy.
Whoa, what was that? Well, these are navel stones. What are they? They're hard clumps of dead skin, cells, and oil that form in your belly button. They're not that uncommon and don't have any symptoms. They go unnoticed. You know, as the plastic surgeon, I've encountered some pretty nasty belly button stones, and they're all related to hygiene, because especially if you have an innie and you don't have a huge belly button, it's very easy for things to get trapped in there. So in the course of doing a tummy tuck or a liposuction of the tummy, we have to get in there and clean out the belly button. Sometimes people are concerned about an umbilical hernia, a hernia around the belly button. So we get in there close and examine it, and I've seen some pretty nasty stones in there.
Yeah.
It looks like a snail coming out of it.
It does kind of look like a snail, but I tell you what, showering helps wash some of that debris away.